Welcome to the Ryerson Negotiation Project. My guest today is Paul Godfrey, currently publisher, president and CEO of the National Post. Welcome, Paul.
Delighted to be here.
Paul has had a very distinguished career. You've been a businessman and still am in many different ways. Former Metro Toronto chairperson, president of the Toronto Blue Jays, chairperson of the Ontario Lottery and Gaming Corporation. You were recipient of the Order of Canada in 1999, the recipient of the Order of Ontario in 2010. You serve on a large number of corporate boards as well as charitable organizations. And you were a very dear friend of Ted Rogers, who the business school at Ryerson is named after. What kind of a guy was Ted Rogers, and what kind of a negotiator was Ted Rogers?
Well, Ted Rogers, in my opinion, David, and first of all, I'm delighted to be here today. But Ted was a very unique individual. He was probably the hardest working person I knew. I at times would drive through Forest Hill on the way home, driving up to North York, and I'd happen to pass his house at 2 in the morning, and there was a light on in his bedroom, and that was Ted probably working on what he had to do the next day. I often saw him prepare to go on a vacation and take 6 or 7 briefcases with him because his vacation was a working vacation. He was always ahead of the game. He knew what you were thinking and could answer questions on any topic. He was at times a very tough guy. He would, question you and tell you he differed with you. Was
that part of his approach, just to be difficult to see how you would respond?
Well, there's no doubt that he would respect you more if you stood up for what you believed in. But when you first encounter it, you say to yourself, "Oh my God, the CEO of the company differs with what I'm saying and takes strong positions," and you go home thinking, well, maybe tomorrow I'm not going to have a job. And he'll phone you the next day and say, "Paul, wasn't that a great meeting we had yesterday?" And that was, in my opinion, his way of saying, maybe I pushed you a little bit too far. He didn't say he was sorry, but Ted never held a grudge. He could fight with you one day, he'd go out and have dinner with you the next. But he had a vision for Rogers, both in the media business, from radio and then later on magazines and television, to the cable television and to the mobile phone, that was way ahead of most people. He could smell a deal a mile away. Ted didn't know a lot about sports, but he knew that there was a lot of money to be made in it, and he bought Sportsnet from Molson, and he bought the Blue Jays from Labatt's, 2 big beer companies, and made both of them worth a lot more than they were when he bought it.
Paul, tell us from your own perspective. I mean, you've been involved in numerous negotiations, whether it's making a particular pitch as the Metro Toronto chairperson, working with politicians, working with business people, working with people in the media, internationally. What sort of preparation would a Paul Godfrey do on a particular initiative or a particular project?
I think it really all depends on which area. It's a lot different in sports than it is in politics. I think the one common thread through it all is people skills. I think that you've got to, what you really have to do, you've got to make sure that the person you're negotiating with, you know everything about him or about her. You've really can't come across as a tough guy. You can't come across as a know-it-all. You have to treat it as a dialogue, and that both of you have to come out with some sort of win-win basis. If I go in with the attitude that I'm going to win and you're going to lose, we're not going to make a deal. And they're not going to make a deal if they go in with the attitude that they're going to win and I'm going to lose.
So your preparation is that you would want to know who you're dealing with from across the table.
That is the primary objective.
How would you do that?
Well, I think that, today it's a lot easier. You can Google anybody and find out their likes and their dislikes and where they've been successful and where they haven't been successful, and you know where you want to get to, and you've got to be able to position yourself. Look, if you go into labor negotiations, for instance, look, union leaders have to get something. They're politicians too. They've got to be elected by the members of the union. So if you think you're going to go in there and just get them against the wall and beat their brains out, it's not going to happen. You're going to have a major labor dispute. At the same time, you've got to explain, as I would to my board of directors, this is the act of the possible. It's not the act of I win and they lose, because when you go into a situation where one wins and one loses, nobody likes losing. You've got to leave something on the table. You've got to make sure that you get what you desperately need, and you leave something for them to sell to their constituency, so that at least it's not a loss for them.
You mentioned at the outset good people skills, good relationships. Obviously, it's an important aspect of the negotiating process. Anything that you have done over the years that you found particularly successful in terms of developing those good relationships? Because some relationships you would have well in advance, while others would be newer relationships.
David, I believe if you network every day of your life, even with people you've never come into contact with, a strange thing happens. Years later, you've met somebody 10 years ago at a social event, you happen to sit at the same table as them, you converse with them, you establish just not an ongoing relationship, but they come away thinking, you know what, there's a knowledgeable guy, he's polite, he's not overly aggressive, and somehow you interact with them again up the road. I'm always glad to do favors for people within my ability to do favors for people. I enjoy helping people who have kids that need medical care and trying to link them up with the right doctor, or people that would just want to come and see you because they're between jobs and what they need to do is they want to network. And it's kind of an amazing thing in life that you don't do those sort of things in order to say you owe me one.
You just do them.
You do them because it's your input. But so many times in my life, I've come across these people at some other point, down the road, as they say, sometimes a week, sometimes 10 years later.
But Paul, you've been able to develop a reputation, certainly in the marketplace, as very skilled, very affable, getting along well with people, but also very decisive. I mean, you've never given away the farm, or at least my research has indicated you've never given away the farm. And that's quite a combination to have. Good people skills, but yet still very, very, very firm. Any comments about that?
You know what, I try not to use this is my final offer, and don't bother coming back to see me at all unless it really is my final offer. A lot of people make the mistake if they walk in the first day and says, here's what I need, if I can't get it, I'm out of here. I think what you have to do with people is make them understand the reason why you're asking for, in labor negotiations, some form of give. Look, I just, in my job as the president of Post Media, I'm dealing with a labor contract out in British Columbia, which probably is out of whack with reality. In fact, not probably, it is out of whack with reality, both in the number of people working on the production plant, the wage rate they're getting compared to anybody else, the lifetime jobs that some of them appear to have. And with the state of affairs of the newspaper industry, things had to change. We're in the process now of discussing this with the union. We have to be realistic, and it's going to mean the end of jobs for certain people. But we want to be very, very fair in saying, well, the contract says you're entitled to so much. I've indicated to them, look, I understand that we have to make this change, otherwise there will not be a newspaper published in British Columbia. And we're not saying that because we're bluffing, we're saying that because we can show them where the trend lines are going. Newspapers worldwide are having difficulty, but because they're having difficulty and print ad revenue is in decline, you got to make it up on the cost side. You can't have contracts guaranteeing people's jobs for a lifetime, or you can't, everybody else is cutting back in certain other areas. So we're explaining that to them. And hopefully we will be able to make the point. But
do they challenge you on some of your assertions in that kind of a situation?
They do, because you know what? The history of negotiations, people have a tendency of exaggerating. You know, and exaggeration does take a big position quite often. But I was prepared to open up the books, show them where the trends are going, show them why we can't do things in the way they've done in the past. And you know what? Years ago, running a newspaper was just having a cash register and listening to the music of it ring. And so the Southern family years ago were very generous with all their people. And you know, quite often when somebody's got a benefit and we're all the same, we don't want to give up that benefit. What do you mean you're taking away that from me? We're all alike, and I'd be the same way. But if it means extinction of the product itself, then you've got to be able to understand and do this in order to save some of the jobs. I have tried to make it clear that sometimes you've got to sacrifice 25% of the jobs to save 75%. But it requires not put a revolver to anybody's head. It requires being honest and upfront and backing up what you say. It's not saying, well, that's it, and I can't tell you why we're doing it. It's just that we have to do it.
You're being accountable for what you say and what you think is the
that is correct.
way forward. You were president of the Blue Jays for what, 8 years?
8 years, 2000 to 2008.
Tell us about your mandate. How did you get your mandate to be the president? Was it Ted Rogers telling you? Was it your board? How was it?
Well, first of all, I was kind of shocked when Ted called me. I'd worked for Ted when Ted bought McLean Hunter. McLean Hunter happened to own the Toronto Sun, and Doug Creighton had hired me right out of City Hall to run the Toronto Sun, and I progressed in the organization. I woke up one day and found out that Ted Rogers did a hostile takeover of McLean Hunter, and consequently was the majority shareholder of Sun Media. And we at times had a great relationship, but the odd time was a stormy relationship. Ted was very determined to do what he wanted to do, and it was my job sometimes to point out that maybe you're not right here, Ted. So when Ted sold the Sun, I was able to put a group together to buy it. It was a management buyout, and we had Teachers Pension Fund, we had Bell Canada, we had Trimark, and we had CIBC World Markets that were part of the acquisition team. And when I eventually sold the company to Quebecor several years later, Ted phoned me up and said, come and have breakfast with me. I was kind of bewildered why he wanted to have breakfast with me, because we did tangle from time to time. And I said, okay, I'll come and have breakfast with you. And he said, I want you to run my baseball team.
Did you have any inkling that that was the purpose of the breakfast meeting?
No. I said, in fact, I questioned him. I said, Ted, what baseball team do you own? He says, I don't own any yet, but with your help, and I want you to negotiate the acquisition from the new owners of the ball club, which was Interbrew, who bought Labatt's. Labatt's were the majority owner of the ball club. And I was stunned. I had been involved in the while I was chairman of Metro, I was one of the people that, and not the only one, but it was one of many people who worked very hard to bring Major League Baseball to Toronto. And we did that in 1977, and here it was 23 years later. Ted was giving me the opportunity of helping him buy the Blue Jays and becoming the president of the team. The mandate at that time was to hire the people that I thought were appropriate to continue on. He didn't give me a list of things, do's and do-nots. I was thrown into the deep end, and it's kind of strange. Baseball, like newspapers, the editorial people in newspapers, when a guy like me walks in that has no newspaper experience and was a politician, there was great suspicion at the beginning. They thought, oh my God, who's this guy? Is he going to come and tell us what to put in the paper with respect to, because all these guys at City Hall are his friends? They found out that wasn't the case. Well, in baseball, it wasn't very much different. They said, who is this guy who just came from the newspaper business? He's going to tell us who's a good baseball player and who isn't a good baseball player. He's going to be a Mr. Know-It-All. That wasn't the case. I hired a general manager that knew a lot more about it. I had veto power. But the problem in running a baseball team, if you veto things that your general manager wants and it doesn't work out, you carry the can.
But how did that mandate work, though? You were brought in, you were the president and CEO of the Blue Jays.
Right.
You must have had a plan.
Oh, for sure.
Who would develop that plan?
Well, I would develop the plan as CEO of the ball club, and I would have to take it to Rogers to get approved, as I'm sure Mr. Beeston does today. I made a change at the end of the first year. Gord Ash, who was a terrific guy and has landed on his feet in Milwaukee as an assistant general manager there. He had a good run in Toronto, and I think he's a great baseball guy. I brought in J.P. Ricciardi, who was a disciple of Billy Beane, the Moneyball expert, in which they made the movie about. I hired J.P. Ricciardi, and he ran the club, and he ran it on a limited budget. So our job was to get the budget, the dollars needed through Rogers to run it in an efficient way. But really, the general manager is the guy that looked after baseball talent. And this is what his job was to. Every deal that he made, because every deal he made involved multi-year contracts, if it went beyond the single year, I would have to get it approved. And I must say, Ted and others in the organization did approve all the recommendations that I made in the years that I was there. Running a baseball...
No pushback?
No pushback. They were terrific. Ted,
Wow.
Ted, who didn't know a lot about sports, but all the other people surrounding were all very good. I had no complaint about that. We were the lowest spending team in the American League East for several years. As we got more deeply experienced in it, Ted did increase the budget. He came into contact with some cable people in Atlanta that said you got to spend more money, and that convinced them to give us more money. But sports is a very interesting situation. You have agents who act for players, who, in my opinion, most agents can out-negotiate most general managers, because most of them are better educated, most of them are sharper negotiations, and they have the product that they can shop around to teams. General managers, for instance, in the field of sports, usually have contracts of 3 to 5 years. And those that have a 5-year contract, if you get to 3 and you're not winning, you start to get a little bit desperate at times. And don't forget, they're not spending their own money, they're spending the owner's money. So they take a shot at sometimes getting an aging superstar. And if that doesn't work out, they're in trouble.
So
agents know that.
Agents know that.
Agents know that. And agents use that. And you can get a player like A.J. Burnett, who's a fun guy to be with, but his agent knows how to drag the last. He can tell you that the St. Louis Cardinals, for instance, are prepared to give him a 5-year contract. You're only offering him a 4, but he'd prefer to come to Toronto. and you really desperately want him, so your general manager says, will come to me or come to whoever the president of the team is, I've got to have this guy. And it's only another $11 million.
So when the GM would come to you as the president, you would have a discussion with him, and if you agreed with what he was saying, you'd get approval.
I'd get approval. If it was within the confines, if it was just a one-year deal, and we had the budget, or I could do it myself. But if it was a multi-year deal that would obligate the owner, which is Rogers Communication, you'd have to pick up the phone and speak to Ted and get the blessing, which, you know what, it's his money, and he was the president and CEO of Rogers Communication, but he was reasonable to deal with. He wanted to win. He wanted to show people that he could, that the Blue Jays could bring glory to Toronto.
So your authority wasn't sort of written down in a document, but it was expressed, it was implied, it was understood in terms of the mandate that you had.
Nobody had to explain it to me, I can assure you. Knowing the personalities that are involved, the wisest thing to do, and maybe it was my political background, you don't walk to the end of the plank and saw it off for yourself. So you make sure you touch base with your employer.